I'm Leah Wells, 17 years old, and the night my parents left me on the side of a wet country road, I still believed they loved me. The rain was coming down hard enough to blur the trees outside our windows, but I could see their faces clearly enough. Dad stared straight ahead, hands clenched white on the wheel. Mom hadn't looked back once. I kept thinking there must be a mistake, that they'd stop the car and say it was all a misunderstanding. But when they told me to get out and handed me a backpack packed with my own essentials, I understood the truth. They were never planning to take me home before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to hold yourself together when the people you trusted most walked away. I grew up in a small town in southern Illinois, the kind where everyone knew everyone and church potlucks filled up your Sunday calendar. My dad worked as an electrician. My mom was a middle school librarian. And when I was little, they were the kind of parents who packed notes in my lunchbox and kissed scraped knees. My brother Caleb was older by 9 years and the kind of kid everyone loved. Bright, funny, dependable when I was 7. He built me a fairy house from leftover wood scraps and painted it with glow-in-the-dark stars. He left when I was 8 after a fight with our dad that I didn't understand at the time, just slammed doors and voices through the wall. After that, his name was never mentioned again at the dinner table. My health started slipping, not long after Caleb disappeared. First it was hand tremors, then dizzy spells. By the time I turned 14, I needed a cane some days and a wheelchair. Other specialists were brought in from St. Louis, and then Chicago bills piled up. And the mood inside our home shifted in ways that were quiet but hard. You could feel it in the way my mom stopped brushing my hair, or the way my dad's voice got shorter by the week. We had less laughter, more silence. The ride that night was different. No music, no talking, just the storm outside and the squeak of the wipers against the windshield. I asked where we were going and got nothing back. Just the sound of my dad's fingers tapping the steering wheel like he was keeping time for something I didn't understand. When we turned off the highway onto a road I'd never seen, my stomach tightened. I asked for my next dose early. My back was starting to spasm. Mom cut me off, told me I'd be fine. She didn't even turn around. The car came to a stop at a gravel shoulder, miles from anything. No lights, no houses, just black trees and wind. The trunk popped. Dad got out, walked around to my side, opened the door and told me to get out. I thought he was joking at first. Then I saw the bag on the floor by my feet. It had my name tag on it from the hospital, one of my sweatshirts, a bottle of water and a pack of medication, the lid taped shut. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled. I slipped in the mud. Dad didn't help me up. He dropped the bag next to me and turned back to the car. Mom didn't even open her window to say goodbye. I called out after them, my voice shaking half from fear, half from cold. But the only sound was the tires crunching away, and then the rain again, louder somehow. After they were gone, I don't know how long I lay there. The road empty, the sky broken open above me. I thought about crawling into the woods and disappearing, or maybe just lying there until morning or until nothing hurt anymore. And then I saw headlights, not from the direction they'd gone, but from further back. Someone was coming closer, slowing down. The outline of a man stepped into the rain, and my first thought was fear, but then he knelt beside me and brushed the hair out of my eyes and said my name. Caleb's voice was older than I remembered, rough around the edges, but still familiar enough to make the fear in my chest loosen just a little. He crouched beside me, shielding me from the rain with his jacket, speaking low, careful. I couldn't hold on to the words, not yet. My body was shaking too hard, the cold sinking past my clothes and into my bones. He lifted me gently like I weighed nothing, and I felt the warmth of his coat and his arms steady and solid after so many years. I caught the scent of pine on his collar before everything went dark again. I woke to firelight and silence, not the silence of abandonment, but of peace. The air smelled like wood smoke and clean flannel. I was lying in a small bed under several thick quilts, and someone had changed me into a soft nightgown I didn't recognize. An IV bag hung beside me, dripping slowly into my arm. The walls were wood, unfinished and warm, and framed photographs lined a shelf near the ceiling, sunsets, trees, a lake in winter. I tried to sit up, but my arms trembled before I even got halfway. The doorway creaked and Caleb stepped into the room holding a mug between both hands. He looked older than I remembered, maybe late 20s now, with his hair grown out at the back and stubble along his jaw. But his eyes hadn't changed. That same deep blue I used to see when we'd sit on the stairs and whisper after bedtime. He smiled when he saw me awake. "Hey, Leia Bean," he said. The old nickname landed soft, not forced. I tried to respond, but my throat was raw. He handed me the mug, just tea. Honey and ginger. The first sip burned, but it helped. I managed to croak out a question. "They left me," I said, voice thin and uneven. "They just left me there." Caleb nodded slowly, setting the mug down. "I know. I saw them." He sat at the edge of the bed, his elbows resting on his knees. I was following them that night. I'd been watching for weeks. Something felt off. It didn't make sense. He'd been gone for nearly 10 years. No calls, no visits, no letters. I asked him where he'd been, what had happened after that night he disappeared. He looked down at his hands, rough tan marked with a thin scar I didn't recognize. "I didn't leave you," he said. "I left them." He paused for a moment, then added, "They kicked me out when I stood up to Dad about your treatment. You were 12, just diagnosed. He didn't want to pay for the specialist in Boston. I offered to help with my own savings. That was the last straw for him. I remembered the shouting, the slam of the front door, the way nobody explained where Caleb had gone. At the time, Mom said he needed to find his own way. She left out everything that mattered. I asked him why he never tried to contact me. He let out a breath. I did. A lot. Letters came back unopened. Phone calls ended with threats. Once I even showed up at your school, but they'd already told the front office I wasn't allowed near you. All those years I thought he'd moved on, forgotten me." I stared at him, unsure how to absorb everything. "Where did you go?" I asked. He ran a hand through his hair, then leaned back slightly. "I was homeless for a bit. Slept in my car when I had one worked construction wash dishes. Eventually got my GED. Met a guy named Frank who helped me get on my feet. He owned land out west and let me live in a trailer in exchange for repairs and labor. He taught me how to stay off the radar. The cabin, the off-grid setup. It all started to make sense. Caleb had built himself a life out here where no one could find him. "I've been looking for you for years," he said quietly. "Joined online support groups, checked hospital records. You were always one step out of reach." His voice cracked just slightly. "I didn't want to come back too late. I didn't know what to say. My chest felt too full. When I finally spoke, it came out in a whisper. They told me I was too much, that they had nothing left." Caleb's eyes burned in the firelight. "They didn't just leave you," he said. "They drained your medical account, the one from all those community fundraisers, and they told the police you ran away." My mouth went dry. "Why?" He picked up his phone from the nightstand and unlocked it, showing me a folder full of documents. Money. Legal protection. Maybe both. I've been documenting everything bank withdrawals, GPS tracking from my car, even dash cam footage of the moment they left you. His voice stayed even, but there was a weight behind it. "I don't want revenge, Leia. I want truth. And I want to make sure they can't do this again." My hands shook as I scrolled through photos and scanned forms. "Why now?" I asked. "Why come for me after all this time?" He looked at me without blinking. "Because I never stopped being your brother. And because I finally had enough proof to do something about it." The fire crackled in the corner of the room. Outside, the rain had eased, replaced by the soft hum of wind through the trees. I looked around, taking in the space for the first time, the hand-built furniture, the shelves lined with supplies, the thick curtains over the windows. This place. You made all of this. Caleb nodded. Took me 3 years. I wanted somewhere safe. Somewhere no one could find unless I let them. I felt my body sinking back into the bed, not from weakness this time, but from something closer to safety. A flicker of something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Before I could say more, he rose from the bed and walked to a nearby shelf. "There's something else," he said, pulling down a leather-bound journal. "I found this in a storage unit under Mom's maiden name. It's hers. I think you should read it." He set the journal on the bedside table. I looked at the worn cover, the curled edges of paper peeking out. "What's in it?" I asked. "I don't know all of it yet," he replied, "but I think there's more to your story than any of us understood." He turned down the lamp and stepped into the hallway. "Rest now," he said. "We've got time to figure it out." I watched the door close softly behind him, then turned to the journal, its weight heavy in my hand. Whatever was in those pages, it had been hidden for a reason. I opened to the first page and began to read. It had been 3 weeks since Caleb carried me out of the rain. I was stronger than I'd been in a long time, though everything still took effort. Mornings began early with stretches and careful movements, each one designed to coax my body back into motion. Arms up, hold 10 seconds, breathe through the burn. Anna, the woman who came to help with my physical therapy, didn't speak much during our sessions, but her presence was steady. She watched closely, correcting my posture, measuring my range of motion, tracking every small gain. Anna Kim was in her mid-30s, with short dark hair and calm brown eyes that didn't flinch when I got frustrated. She was a former medic, Caleb told me now, working part-time at a clinic 30 miles from the cabin. She came 3 days a week, always with a quiet nod and a clipboard in hand. I trusted her, though we hadn't talked much beyond what my body needed. Today she said I'd gained 5 degrees of movement in my shoulders. It didn't sound like much, but it was something. After she packed up, Caleb helped me to the porch. The chair there had thick cushions and a blanket across the arms. I settled into it and watched him in the garden. He moved with quiet purpose, turning the soil, checking leaves, picking through rows of early tomatoes and string beans. The land around the cabin stretched wide woods on one side, a greenhouse tucked behind a row of trees, and a stream that ran just out of sight. The porch overlooked all of it. The cabin itself was simple from the outside, built from rough timber, and capped with a tin roof that pinged in the rain. Inside it had more comforts than I expected. Solar power running water from the stream, even satellite internet hidden behind a firewall system that Caleb designed himself. What surprised me most was the hidden room beneath the root cellar. He showed it to me on my second week there, a space with generator supplies and a computer setup that didn't belong in the middle of nowhere. "You never told me how you learned all this," I said one afternoon, watching him repair a cracked greenhouse window. Caleb wiped his hands on a towel. "Necessity," he said. "Couldn't afford to hire anyone, so I figured things out. And I had help. A guy named Frank Older Vet found me sleeping in my car one winter and dragged me to his cabin. Said I could stay if I pulled my weight." He smiled slightly. "I ended up staying 3 years. What did he teach you?" I asked. Caleb leaned against the railing. "How to build. Grow food. Stay off-grid. Mostly, though, he taught me about justice." The word hung between us. I glanced at the journal still sitting on the table beside my chair. I hadn't gotten far, only a few entries in, but the pages already felt heavy. "Have you read it all?" I asked quietly. "Enough to know there's more going on than I thought," he said. "There are entries about a deal they made. I think it's connected to your condition. You think I wasn't just sick?" He didn't answer right away. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I'm going to find out." That night we sat by the stove again. It had become a kind of ritual, him and the old rocker, me on the couch with a blanket, the journal open between us. The rain outside softened everything. "Tell me more about your life," I said, tracing the edge of a page. "You mentioned someone." "A fiancé." Caleb nodded slowly. "Hannah. Met her a few years ago in Colorado. She was smart, worked in environmental law." He stared into his mug. "She wanted a normal life. Suburbs. Kids. Dinner with her parents every Sunday. I couldn't give her that. Because of me. Because of everything," he said. "The past. The way I lived. The nightmares. We tried, but it fell apart." She gave back the ring and wished me peace. I didn't know what to say. He had given up so much, and I was only just starting to understand the scale of it. He noticed me watching him and said, "Don't be sorry. I made my choices. I'd do it again." The next morning, therapy didn't go as planned. I tried to stretch through a spasm and ended up on the floor, overwhelmed by tremors. I started crying before I could stop myself. "I hate this," I said, voice sharp with frustration. "I hate being broken." Anna didn't say anything right away. Then she sat beside me, legs crossed, hands resting calmly on her knees. "You know why I left the military?" she asked. I shook my head. "IED blast. Lost 3 people in my unit. Got out with burns down my arm." She rolled up her sleeve to show me. The scars were rough and faded, but still visible. I spent months thinking I was broken, drank too much, shut everyone out. She looked me in the eye. One night I put a gun in my mouth, would have pulled the trigger if my dog hadn't knocked over a lamp. I stared at her, stunned. After that, I realized something. Surviving isn't the same as living. You can breathe and eat and sleep and still be dying inside. The work begins when you choose to live again. That afternoon, I asked Caleb to take me to the hidden room. I want to understand what happened, I told him. Not just the night they left me, but the whole thing. The illness, the treatments, all of it. I need to know what was done to me. He didn't hesitate. We spent hours in front of the monitors reviewing everything he'd collected: financial records, medical paperwork, insurance documents. There were gaps in the timeline names. I didn't recognize doctors who showed up once and never returned. The more I read, the more things stopped making sense. One night, as I was writing in the journal, my own notes beside our mother's, I heard a car outside, not pulling up but passing slowly, too slowly for a rural road at that hour. The next day, Anna arrived earlier than usual. She looked tense. 2 men came to the clinic asking questions, she said. They had your photo, Leia. Said they were relatives. One of them showed a badge when he thought I wasn't looking corporate security, not law enforcement. I felt my chest tighten. How did they know where to find you? I don't know, she said. But they weren't looking to help. They were trying to retrieve something, or someone. That night I found an envelope on the floor by the front door. No return address. Inside was one line typed cleanly in black ink. You were never meant to survive. Stop digging. Caleb read it in silence, jaw clenched. Then he led me to the security monitor and pointed to the feed from earlier that day. A sedan had parked at the edge of the woods. A man in a jacket had walked toward the house, placed something on the step, and left without knocking. They found the cabin, Caleb said, voice low. But they don't know what we've uncovered. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window until morning, watching shadows move between the trees. When the sun came up, I turned to Caleb and said what I'd been thinking all night. I'm not running anymore. Morning light came cold and thin through the curtains when I told Caleb I wasn't running anymore. He stood at the window, one hand resting on the frame, and studied the tree line before he answered. Then we do this smart, he said. Slow, careful, and documented. I nodded, feeling the choice settle in my chest like something solid for the first time in years. We built a rhythm around that promise. Therapy in the mornings with Anna when she could get away from the clinic, rest after lunch, research in the afternoons. Caleb had a secure computer down in the cellar room, air cool and steady on my skin. The hum of the generator, a soft backdrop. He showed me the folders he kept labeled by year, by hospital, by name, clean lines of evidence waiting to be put in order. I opened a spreadsheet and started from the beginning, building a timeline of symptoms, clinics, prescriptions, and who signed off on each change. The journal waited on the table like an old box you're not sure you want to open. I lifted the ribbon and turned the pages in small sections. My mother's handwriting was neat and practiced ink, no longer black, but not yet brown. Most entries were ordinary school fundraisers, grocery lists, notes about my brother's baseball games. Then, nestled between a list of bills and a recipe for pot roast, I found a page dated the spring after my 3rd birthday. The words were plain. She wrote that paperwork had been signed, that an initial deposit hit their account, and that more payments would come every few months. A doctor had assured them the risks were limited. She wrote that I would be helping other children. I read the paragraph twice before calling for Caleb. He pulled a chair beside me and leaned in, forearms on the table, eyes moving without blinking. How much, he asked quietly. I told him. He stood cross to the desk and came back with bank records he'd recovered from the storage unit. Side by side, the numbers matched, one deposit, then another, then a pattern through the years. He set the papers down, tracing the dates with a fingertip. They didn't just accept help, he said. They entered a contract. I turned to the next page. There were notes about appointments outside the regular pediatric office, about study protocols, and lines that trailed off mid-sentence. It felt like reading past a door that had always been locked. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with my illness. I kept my eyes on the ink and breathed slow until the room settled again. Do you recognize any of the names? I asked. Caleb nodded toward a clipped set of forms in another folder. One company shows up more than once. He flipped the stack and held up a page. Neurovance. He didn't speak the name like a discovery. He spoke it like something he had already suspected. Downstairs, he pulled up an offline copy of their website from a year earlier. Corporate language filled the screen: innovation, early intervention, life-changing therapies. There were press releases about funding rounds and partnerships with major hospitals. There were statements about promising data in pediatric neurology. None of it mentioned side effects. None of it mentioned what was written in my mother's hand. We took careful notes on what we could verify and what we could only infer. I wrote down doctor names that appeared once and disappeared. Caleb added addresses and the dates our family moved. When my hands grew tired, I read aloud from the journal while he typed. The work calmed me in a way I didn't expect. The facts created edges. Edges made a shape. A shape could be held to the light. Anna arrived late that afternoon, hair damp from the rain. She checked my vitals, then glanced at the open journal. "You found something," she said. I told her about the entry and the payments, the way the numbers lined up with the records from the storage unit. She listened without interrupting, her face steady. When I finished, she closed her bag and folded her hands. "Then your safety becomes the priority," she said. "When people decide to bury a story, they don't stop because you're telling the truth. They escalate." Caleb had already installed new motion sensors along the driveway and tucked a camera into the rafters above the porch. That evening, he walked me through the feeds again, pointing out angles I hadn't noticed, telling me which monitors were battery-backed if the power failed. "The same car drove past twice yesterday," he added, tapping a finger on the timestamp. "No plate light. Out-of-county frame." We kept the lights low and ate dinner at the small table by the stove. After dishes, I went back to the journal. There was an entry from the year I turned 5, about a trip to a research day, the word underlined twice. Another mentioned a medication. I didn't remember a note about how I fell asleep in the car on the way home. My hand tightened around the page without meaning to, and I set the book down to breathe. Caleb noticed and passed me a glass of water. We said little. There wasn't much to add that wasn't already there in ink and numbers. Near midnight, a slow set of headlights moved along the far ridge and paused. The camera caught the glow through the trees. The lights clicked off, then on again, as if the driver was adjusting to darkness. I watched the monitor until the engine sound faded. Caleb rewound the clip twice, jaw tight, then exhaled and shut the screen. "They're testing boundaries," he said, "so we keep ours." The next day, Anna arrived earlier than usual. She carried a small cooler and a folded jacket, as if she had prepared for a longer stay. After we worked through a shorter set of stretches, she set the clipboard aside. "2 men came to the clinic again," she said. "Same ones, I think. They asked different questions. This time wanted to know if I was treating a girl with a birthmark on her wrist." She looked at me, then at Caleb. They weren't local. Their car had corporate parking stickers, not hospital badges. Caleb stepped to the window and pulled the curtain a fraction. "They're closing in," he said. Anna nodded. They didn't act impatient. They acted certain. She paused, then added, "I told them I hadn't seen you. I don't know how long that will hold." We moved our work downstairs for the afternoon. The cellar room felt protected in a way I hadn't appreciated before. I read more entries while Caleb mapped movement dates of appointments, shifts in doctors' names, notes about treatments that began and ended without explanation. Patterns started to show between the lines like a photograph coming into focus in a tray of developer. A doctor appeared for a month, then vanished. A dosage went up without a corresponding note about my response. Payments paused, then resumed with a larger number. I recorded all of it. Later, I opened the envelope we had kept, since it appeared on the porch, and read the single line again. "You were never meant to survive." The words were simple. The effect was not. I set the page back in the envelope and slid it under the journal's ribbon. Caleb watched me do it and said nothing. The silence felt like agreement. That night, the wind came in off the ridge and rattled the eaves. The stove snapped and settled. We sat at the table with our notes arranged in clean stacks. "What would it look like to take this public?" I asked. Caleb kept his eyes on the papers and answered slowly. "It would look like visibility," he said. "It would also look like risk. We need one more piece before we move." He tapped the list of names we'd pulled from older files, someone who can speak from inside. The journal offered no names beyond a last initial and a title. I turned pages hoping for one full signature, but the entries drifted to smaller details. What I wore to an appointment who picked me up from school, a reminder to call the insurance company before the next visit. I closed the cover and set my palm on it, feeling the grain of the leather under my skin. The facts we had were enough to draw a line. We needed someone who could trace it to its source. Anna returned the following morning with coffee and a cautious look. She checked the porch camera, then stepped inside and lowered her voice. "I've been asking discreet questions," she said. "Not about you, about the company." She pulled a folded paper from her jacket pocket and set it on the table. "There's a former researcher who left 3 years ago. She teaches at a small college now and doesn't list the old job anywhere. When I mentioned symptoms like yours, she didn't hang up. She said to call back tomorrow from a number that can't be traced. We didn't answer right away." The room felt smaller and larger at once, like breath held too long. Caleb broke the quiet. "If she talks, he said we move to the next step." Anna nodded. "Meet on her terms. No phones. Public enough for safety, private enough for trust." I looked between them then at the journal again. The pages had carried me as far as they could. The rest would need a voice that knew what those entries meant. I closed the book and slid it toward Caleb. "Then we make the call," I said. He turned the cover face down like a promise sealed. That evening I sat on the porch while the light went from gold to gray. The woods were quiet in that particular way that tells you everything is listening. I thought of the sentence in the envelope and of the line in my mother's hand that tried to make it sound like help. I rested both hands on the arms of the chair until the tremor eased. When I rose, I did it slowly and on my own, one breath at a time. Through the window I saw Caleb at the table and Anna by the stove, their outlines steady in the warm light. We had a name to call in the morning. We had a path that led beyond the pages of a journal. And we had a line we would not step back from anymore. Anna made the call from a payphone 2 towns over. She carried no ID, used gloves to touch the receiver, and spoke only when the line clicked twice. When she returned to the cabin, her face was pale but steady. "She agreed," Anna said. "Tomorrow, noon. She'll give the location an hour before. No electronics. Just us." Caleb nodded, already pulling a backpack from under the table, filling it with MAPS water and a first aid kit. The night stretched long after that, quiet but heavy. We each prepared in different ways, Anna by packing and double-checking supplies, Caleb by memorizing escape routes, and me by reading one last page of the journal before setting it aside. The message arrived the next morning through a scrambled email account Anna had set up months earlier. A picnic area at a state park 2 counties west, public enough for cover, isolated enough for privacy. We left within the hour, Anna driving her old sedan along back roads while Caleb took his truck in the opposite direction. His plan was simple: draw attention if anyone followed us, buy time if things turned bad. I wanted to argue, but he cut me off before I could. "It's the only way you get there unseen," he said. His voice was calm, but I could see the tension in his jaw. The drive passed in silence. My fingers tapped against my cane, my chest tight with nerves. When we pulled into the gravel lot, only one car waited near the tree line. A small silver hatchback, clean but not new. A woman stepped out when she saw us. She looked to be in her early 50s, slight with hair pinned back and glasses slipping low on her nose. She scanned the lot before walking toward us, her movements cautious but not hesitant. "Dr. Voss?" Anna asked. The woman gave a quick nod. Her eyes settled on me, taking in the tremor in my hand, the way I leaned against the cane. Recognition flickered across her face. "Phase 3, she murmured almost to herself. She gestured toward a table tucked under the shade of 2 pines. We followed. She didn't waste time. There were 27 children in that trial, she said softly. By the 5th year, 24 had severe complications. Most were pulled from the study, though the paperwork lists them as voluntary withdrawals. She pressed her lips together, then added, "You shouldn't have survived this long." The words struck deep, but I kept my focus on her. "Why me?" I asked. Dr. Voss shook her head. "I don't know. I left before they concluded. I resigned when I realized they were ignoring the data pushing ahead for funding rounds. But I kept copies." She reached into her bag and slid a flash drive across the table. Trial protocols, patient charts, memos between executives. Enough to show intent. Anna tucked the drive into her jacket without hesitation. "Why come forward now?" she asked. Dr. Voss's hands trembled slightly. "Because silence keeps me complicit. And because if they find her," she looked at me again, "they won't let her speak." She closed her bag quickly when her phone buzzed. The color drained from her face. She showed us the screen, an unknown number, the message simple. "Man at your apartment asking for you. Said he's your brother. No brother listed in your file." She rose abruptly. "I have to go." We didn't stop her. Anna hustled me back to the car, her eyes scanning the lot. We took a winding route home, doubling back twice to check for tails. The cabin came into view just as dusk fell. Caleb wasn't back yet. His truck was gone, his tools undisturbed. Hours ticked by with no word. The worry sat heavier with each passing minute until near midnight when my prepaid phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number: arrested. False charges. Lawyer needed. Storage unit key under 3rd Rock North corner. Don't come. Not safe. Anna read it twice before speaking. "He wants us to retrieve the files," she said. "We left at dawn." The storage unit was small, tucked at the edge of an industrial park. Inside was a metal cabinet drawers packed with documents, financial ledgers, hospital contracts, surveillance photos, voice recordings labeled by date. At the very bottom was a sealed envelope with my name written in Caleb's handwriting. Inside was a prepared petition for emancipation, complete with evidence of abandonment and medical neglect. The court date was already stamped for later that week. Back at the cabin, Anna spread the files across the table. "We file for protection first," she said. "That shields you legally, then we move on the company." I held the envelope with shaking hands, the legal papers heavier than they should have been. "What about Caleb?" I asked. Anna's eyes softened. "We'll get him back. But right now, this is what he wants you to do." That night, I turned to the last entry in my mother's journal. The ink was darker, written with a hurried hand. She wrote that the money was gone, drained by my father's gambling. She wrote that I wasn't supposed to live this long, that they were watching, that she feared what would happen when the truth surfaced. The final line was simple: "God forgive us for what we've done." I closed the book slowly and set it aside. My hands no longer shook. For the first time, I knew exactly what I had to do. The courthouse waited. Caleb's freedom waited. And so did the moment to speak, not just for myself, but for every child who never made it past those trials. The courthouse steps looked steeper up close. Anna parked a block away so we could approach without drawing a crowd too soon, but a small knot of local reporters had already gathered near the entrance. She offered her arm, and I took it, my cane clicking softly against the concrete. Inside, the clerk stamped our petition with a flat thud that echoed more than it should have. "Emergency emancipation, protective order, request for an inquiry." The words were just ink on paper, but they cleared a path. By the time we stepped back outside, the press had doubled. A woman with a handheld mic asked if I had a statement. I nodded once and moved to the portable stand their team had set up. The breeze lifted the strand of hair at my cheek. Anna smoothed it back without looking like she had. I folded my hands to keep them steady and spoke into the cluster of microphones. I said my name. I said what my parents had done 3 weeks earlier on a back road in the rain. I described the years of treatments I did not understand at the time and the entries in a journal that pointed to an agreement signed when I was a toddler. I didn't rush. I laid out the facts one clean line at a time. Questions broke across the steps, voices stacking cameras whirring. I kept my answers simple. Yes, I had documentation. Yes, a former company scientist had agreed to speak. Yes, my brother had been arrested on charges that did not match his life or his whereabouts. "I'm asking for light," I said finally. "We will share what we have with anyone who can help us keep this public and safe." Anna guided me away before the circle could tighten. We left in measured steps, the crowd parting with a rustle of jackets and notebooks. The pressure worked faster than I expected. 2 days later, the charges against Caleb collapsed on their own weight. The jail released him just after noon, and he came through the double doors with that same steady look he wore when he set a beam in place or checked the locks at night. He held me carefully so my balance wouldn't shift. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. He touched the edge of my cane with 2 fingers like it was an old friend. "Let's go home," he said. Home didn't feel quiet anymore. The phones rang more often, even through the layers of buffers Caleb had built. An investigative producer left a message with Anna, then another. "National," she mouthed across the room, eyebrows raised. We didn't answer yet. There was another call we were waiting on. Dr. Voss's email came through Anna's encrypted inbox late that night. She had decided to speak with a federal panel. She would share the protocols she'd saved and the memos she'd kept. She would do it under oath. We sat around the table, the lamp throwing a circle of light over the wood. "This gives them something they can't ignore," Caleb said. I breathed out slowly and pressed my palm flat to the tabletop. 3 days before her scheduled appearance, the fire started in the middle of the night. The alert popped up on Anna's phone, first local news from 2 counties over single-family residence, active flames, possible gas leak. The address matched the one Dr. Voss had used to send us her mailing instructions. The next update came an hour later. She had survived with burns to her hands and smoke inhalation. Her research had not. The file cabinets were gone, the computer a charred frame on the concrete floor. Anonymous quotes started to appear by morning, suggesting confusion in her timeline questions about her mental health. It was efficient and familiar. "We need to widen the circle," Caleb said. His voice didn't rise. It settled. The producer's number sat where we had left it beside the phone. I called. The staffer who answered spoke quietly and didn't ask for details we couldn't give over a line. "We can move quickly," she said, "but we'll do it right." I looked to Anna. She nodded once. We agreed to a live segment, no time for edits, no space to recut a story in someone else's shape. The studio lights were cooler than I expected. The chair was low and firm, its fabric rough against my palms. The host introduced me with a brief summary and then listened more than she talked. I told the story again, roadside rain abandonment rescue, and then laid out the documents. Bank records, journal pages, the contract with my name, in a line I could not have signed at 3 years old. She asked for clarity for dates for the shape of the trial, and I answered with what we knew and where the gaps were. There were no speeches, only the order of things. When we had reached the point where the facts said as much as they could, I did the one thing I hadn't done in public yet. I asked the floor manager for a moment. He glanced at the host. She gave a small nod. I set my hands on the arms of the chair and leaned forward until my feet found their place under me. Pain edged the movement, but it didn't define it. The studio quieted so completely I could hear the air vent. I stood. "Doctors told me I would never do this again," I said softly, balanced on both feet. "I'm not cured and I'm not finished. But I can stand." The host's eyes were wet. She didn't interrupt. I held the position until the tremor in my left leg began to whisper of limits, then sat back down without help. The floor manager exhaled, not loud, but clear. The segment broke for a short advertisement. The producer's thumbs up flashed through the glass. The next morning, news alerts stacked before I finished my tea. The company's stock had dropped hard at the opening bell. Statements went out from their headquarters within the hour, heavy with concern and careful language. Our inbox filled with messages from families who recognized pieces of their own stories in ours, children with tremors that appeared out of nowhere, medical notes that shifted without explanation, file numbers that matched the format on our forms. A tag with my name attached to the word justice began to appear beneath posts. I read enough to understand the shape of it, and then stopped. We needed to keep our eyes on the work. By late afternoon, the U.S. Attorney's Office announced a formal review. It wasn't a charge, it wasn't a verdict. It was a door opening outward, and that was enough. Reporters stood on the courthouse lawn again at dusk, and I spoke only to say thank you for paying attention. Thank you for letting us name the pieces. Caleb stood at my back, his hand on the wheelchair handle, not to push it, just to hold something that connected us both to the ground. We drove home in the long stretch of evening, the sky still carrying the last color of the day. The cabin lights were low, the stove giving off a soft, radiant heat that settled in my shoulders when I crossed the threshold. We ate late eggs and toast, nothing complicated. Anna washed the plates while I dried. Caleb checked the cameras and then set his watch on the table like he always did. The rhythm of it steadied the room. The next day brought the first formal letter from my parents' attorney. The phrasing said they had been misled. It named innovative medical opportunities and bad faith by third parties. It did not name abandonment. It did not name a roadside. I set the paper down beside the journal and left it there. We were past arguing through statements. Calls came in waves after that. Advocates, old teachers, a neighbor who remembered the bake sale the first summer. My hands shook. We chose what to answer and what to save for later. I met with the attorney Anna trusted, and we filled in the blanks of the petition with the documents from the storage unit. The judge set a date for the hearing sooner than I expected. Maybe the calendar had room. Maybe the local news in the hallway found its way to the docket. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse felt smaller than it had on the day of the press conference. Fewer cameras, more quiet. We sat outside the courtroom on a wooden bench that faced a window. I pressed my hand against the warmth of the glass and watched a sparrow shift along the ledge. When the clerk called our case, I stood slowly, steadied my breath, and walked into the room with my attorney at my side. I told the judge what had happened in words I had practiced until they sounded like my own. I handed over the petition and the pages that supported it. I didn't look at my parents. They were not there. Their signatures were. The judge's ruling was clear and quick. Emancipation granted. Temporary protective order in place. Referral issued to the appropriate agencies. The gavel came down with one measured strike. Outside the hallway felt wider. Caleb leaned against the wall by the water fountain, hands in his pockets, like a man waiting for the mechanic to finish an oil change. He tipped his head at me, an old habit from before everything. "How'd it go?" he asked. I handed him the certified copy. He scanned it once, then once again, and folded it carefully before tucking it into his jacket. He didn't say "good job" or "I'm proud of you." He just exhaled and said, "Okay." We stepped into the afternoon light together. The air smelled like cut grass and hot pavement. I could feel the tremor coming the way it always did when my body had reached its line. Caleb noticed before I spoke and moved closer without turning it into a scene. We stood like that for a minute, shoulder to shoulder, until the tremor eased enough for me to move. Back at the cabin, Anna had put a pot of soup on the stove. She ladled some into bowls and set them on the table, then sat with us while the steam rose between our hands. "This changes the ground under your feet," she said. "It's not the whole thing, but it's ground." I nodded and sipped until the heat reached my chest. We cleaned up quietly and stepped onto the porch as dusk came down. The ridge looked the same as it had the first night I arrived, but it didn't feel the same. The boundary lines felt clearer. The light from the kitchen window fell across the boards and stopped just shy of the steps. I stood at that edge and listened to the night sounds in the trees. The next call would come from a place I couldn't predict: a courtroom across the state, an office in Washington. A voice we hadn't heard yet with a piece of the map. The case was no longer just ours to carry. It had a weight that belonged in public hands. We had taken the first step onto that wider road. The rest of it waited just ahead. The weeks after the hearing blurred into motion. What had once been quiet hours on the porch or long evenings by the stove became schedules filled with interviews, filings, and phone calls that stretched past midnight. Anna managed the pace like she'd been preparing for it her whole life, keeping lists on clipboards and calendars spread across the table. Caleb stayed close, driving me to meetings, scanning doorways, keeping his eyes on every shadow. I learned how to balance my body in courtrooms and studio lights, my cane steady in one hand and my documents in the other. The investigation widened. Dr. Voss, bandaged but resolute, appeared before the federal panel with her copies of trial protocols. Her voice shook at first, but the words carried their own weight. She confirmed the payments, the ignored safety warnings, the pressure from executives to show progress at any cost. The hearing room was silent as she described 27 children enrolled, 24 showing catastrophic effects within years. When she looked my way, her eyes held both apology and resolve. I nodded back, not in forgiveness, but in recognition of the truth she carried. The company struck back quickly. News stories surfaced with grainy photos of me at the courthouse headlines, twisting my emancipation into a rebellion against strict but loving parents. An opinion piece painted Caleb as a drifter, exploiting his sick sister for money. We sat at the cabin's table, copies of the articles spread between us. Caleb shrugged, but I saw his hands clench. "It won't hold," Anna said firmly. Facts win when you keep putting them in the light. We kept moving. The investigative team invited me back for a second segment this time, alongside another family who recognized their child's medical codes in the documents. Their daughter had died at 14. Her mother held a photograph as she spoke, voice breaking only once. I reached for her hand, and we sat like that through the rest of the broadcast. When the program aired, the phone at the cabin lit up for hours. Families, lawyers, journalists, all with fragments of the same story. It was no longer just mine. One afternoon, a letter arrived in a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single page of my mother's handwriting. The words were shaky, uneven. She wrote that she had weeks to live. She admitted greed, admitted weakness, admitted that my father had pushed harder than she had resisted. She did not ask forgiveness. She said only that I had been stronger than both of them put together. I read it once, folded it carefully, and slid it under the journal's cover. Caleb watched but didn't press. We both knew some bridges were never meant to be rebuilt. The foundation started as an idea on the back of an envelope: safe housing for survivors' therapy programs for families, legal aid for those facing corporate silence. Within months, donations began to arrive, small at first, then larger as the story spread. The cabin expanded into something more still simple on the outside, but with new buildings tucked among the trees. A greenhouse became a therapy room. The old cellar housed not just evidence, but resources for people who came with their own files and photographs. Anna left her clinic to run the trauma program, her calm voice steadying parents who whispered the same words I once had. I thought we were alone. Reporters returned for follow-ups, cameras tracing the sign at the entrance Wells Foundation for medical ethics and survivor support. I stood beside it with Caleb the cane in my hand, but my weight balanced more evenly than before. "What do you think?" he asked. I looked at the building beyond, at Anna crossing the porch with a child who had tremors like mine, at the staff moving quietly inside. "It's a beginning," I said. He smiled, lines at the corners of his eyes easing for the first time in years. The lawsuits moved slower, but the company faltered under pressure. Executives resigned subpoenas, stacked stockholders, demanded answers they couldn't provide. Our parents faced their own reckoning: financial collapse, public shame charges of fraud tied to the medical fund they had drained. I didn't attend the hearings. I didn't need to. Their silence in courtrooms could not undo the night they left me on that roadside, nor erase the trail they had signed in ink. One evening I spoke at a town ceremony recognizing the foundation's work. The hall was small rows of folding chairs filled with neighbors, survivors, and volunteers. I walked to the microphone without help, my cane left leaning against the wall. I told them the truth, not the headlines, not the summaries, but the steady line from a child left in the rain to a woman standing in front of them now. "I was once considered a burden," I said. "Now I know I was never that. I was a voice they didn't want heard. And so are you." The room was quiet, then filled with the sound of hands clapping, not thunderous but steady, like rain on the roof. That night, Caleb and I stood on the porch while the stars rose over the ridge. The sanctuary looked both the same and entirely different lights, glowing in the windows, laughter carrying faintly from one of the new cabins. "We're not finished," Caleb said softly. I nodded, my hand resting on the railing, steady against the wood. The fight was larger now, carried by many, but it had started here. And it would continue here no matter how far it spread. The next morning brought another letter, this one official notice of the company's bankruptcy, filing a settlement fund established for survivors' criminal investigations still ongoing. Anna read it at the table, her expression firm but tired. "This is what we pushed for," she said. "Accountability. It doesn't erase it, but it marks it." Caleb folded the letter neatly and set it beside the journal. I traced the edge of the paper with my fingertip, then closed the cover over it all. The past was still there, but so was the future. We walked outside together, the three of us, down the gravel path, lined with young trees Caleb had planted years before. Their branches reached higher now, leaves thick enough to cast shade across the path. I leaned lightly on my cane, but walked the whole stretch without stopping. At the end, we turned back toward the cabin and the new buildings beyond. Life had changed, and the road ahead held more battles, but we were no longer standing in the dark. We had found light, and we had built something that could last. We turned back toward the cabin with the morning at our backs, and for the first time, the path felt like it belonged to us. The buildings were simple, the paint still fresh in places, but the work inside had weight. Anna waved from the porch, a folder tucked under her arm, and a child reached for her hand as they stepped through the doorway. I could hear low voices and the scrape of chairs, ordinary sounds that once felt out of reach. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a steady rhythm. I split my days between therapy sessions, meetings with families, and quiet hours in the office, going through files that came in from across the country. Caleb handled the grounds and the hardware, moving between roofs and gardens like a man who finally knew where to put his hands. At night, we cooked simple meals and left the kitchen window open to let in the scent of rain. News came in small pieces, the way news often does. The company's bankruptcy moved forward, a settlement fund took shape, and names I had only seen on letterhead appeared on court calendars. Dr. Voss testified again this time, with attorneys who knew how to protect her. She stopped by the foundation, once bandages off fingers still stiff from the fire. We sat in the shade by the greenhouse and spoke quietly about what can be rebuilt and what simply has to be named. A letter arrived from the hospice a month later. My mother had passed in the night. The note was brief and kind. I stood on the porch with it in my hand and felt the stillness of the trees beyond the field. Caleb stepped beside me without asking questions. I folded the paper and placed it in the journal, then closed the cover and rested my palm on the leather. Some doors close with noise. Others close with a click you feel more than hear. Work did not stop for loss. People kept showing up with binders and photographs and a timeline they could not quite hold alone. Anna built a program that met them where they stood, quiet rooms, clear forms, and a pace that honored what their bodies could manage. I taught a young boy how to count his breaths and use a wall for balance, and he grinned when his heel finally touched down. I smiled back and let the moment land inside me. On the anniversary of the night I was left in the rain, we held a small gathering at the edge of the meadow. No cameras, no speeches, just neighbors and survivors and staff standing in a loose circle as dusk lowered over the ridge. Caleb lit 3 lanterns and set them on the ground, one for the children, lost one for those still fighting, one for the truth that brought us here. We stood together until the first stars came out, and then we walked back in the dark, step by step, not hurrying. When the house grew quiet, I took my cane and went to the far fence. The air held that clean, cool weight it gets before a storm. I thought about how a life can be broken and still be whole, how justice is often slow but steady like water finding its level. I thought about the word burden and how easily it falls apart when held up to real light. I did not feel small beneath the sky. I felt placed. I don't pretend that what we built makes everything right. It doesn't. But it gives shape to something that used to be only pain. It says we were here and we told the truth, and we left a door open for whoever comes next. Some days, that is enough. On the other days, we hold one another up and wait for morning. If you've listened this far, thank you for staying with me. If any part of this story touched a place you've carried alone, feel free to share where you're listening from or pass this along to someone who needs it. And if you'd like to hear more stories about strength and dignity, you're welcome to subscribe and sit with us again.